Suddenly, he noticed a big tree in front of him, and the horse and the steer were headed for opposite sides of it. Figuring it was time to say his prayers, the cowboy recited the only one that he knew. Lord, make us grateful for these blessings we are about to receive. Like the fictional cowboy, many of us are at a loss when we need a prayer for that special occasion. Here is one you may want to share with your families this Thanksgiving. Loving Spirit, be our guest, dine with us, share our bread, that our table might be blessed and our souls be fed. Now, a prayer can be spoken or silent. It need not be addressed to any deity we know or can name. What it should do is express our sense of grateful participation with the gracious forces of life. If you don't like mine, say a prayer of your own or use the old cowboys. The important thing is to give thanks for all the bumps and bruises along the way. It remains a heck of a ride. So when I was serving a congregation, I asked a question as a thought stimulator for a sermon in the November newsletter. I said, how do we show gratitude and what brings us hope in the world? Another way of asking the question is what we are thankful for and in what way should we express our thankfulness. Now, an old man was down on his luck and was panhandling on Fifth Avenue before the annual Thanksgiving Day parade, before it got underway in New York City. You've probably all seen it on TV at least 100 times. Well, as an obviously well-to-do couple strolled by, he called out to them, "May the blessing of the Lord, which brings love and joy and wealth and a fine family, follow you all the days of your life." There was a pause as that couple passed by his outstretched hand without contributing. Then he shouted after them, "And never catch up to you." Now, this man would have been thankful for any assistance which would come his way from the couple. When it didn't materialize and his hopes were dashed, he responded, as many of us would, with callous words meant to vent our frustrations. You may have muttered a few things as someone cut you off in traffic. One of the harder lessons in life that we learn is that we don't always receive what we feel we deserve. Now, there's a song that from my youth was, "You don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need." But, we say, "I should have gotten that raise, not the other person. They aren't as good, as smart, as industrious, as fill in the blank, as I am." Yet we are given many things for which we can give thanks, but we have to notice them before we do. Many of us in this country don't stop to realize what type of life we really have. As the last few days of the year wind down and people anticipate what comes next for them, how many of us have given thanks that we live in a country that's not presently at war? How many of us appreciate that we have enough to eat or enough clothes to wear or a place to shelter us from the elements? As you may well know, right now, there are people being deprived of the necessary food and shelter that everyone has a right to have. Men, women, and children are being arrested and deported from America for the sin of seeking a better life for them and their families. Well, reflecting upon these things brings our lives into a sharper focus as to what we truly have for which we can give thanks. Now, Snoopy, if you remember Peanuts, is getting dog food for his Thanksgiving Day dinner. And he is aware that everyone else in the family is inside having turkey. He meditates and talks to himself. How about that? Everyone is eating turkey today, but just because I'm a dog, I get dog food. He trots away and positions himself on the top of his doghouse and concludes, of course, it could be worse. I could have been born a turkey. Now, as we look back to the founding celebration of Thanksgiving Day, we discover that things had been pretty grim for the Pilgrims, if you don't remember your history. The Pilgrims came to America across the Atlantic on the Mayflower, seeking religious freedom. They landed at Plymouth Rock in December of 1620. Now, the Pilgrims lived off their provisions through that first hard winter in New England. They planted a communal garden in the summer, but the settlers didn't know how to plant Indian corn, and the crop was small. In November 1621, more Pilgrims arrived without adequate provisions. Governor William Bradford was worried that he calculated that the food would only last 6 months at half rations per person. After the second hard winter, another ship arrived in May of 1622 with 7 more pilgrims and some letters, but no food. The food supply was almost gone, and these early settlers were starving. In the summer of 1622, another ship arrived, and it brought some food, but the ration was now 1/4 pound of bread per day. That's not much. Because of their hunger, settlers were going to their community garden and stealing the food, while the thieves were caught and whipped. The communal garden idea wasn't working, so in early 1623, the settlers decided to parcel out the land to individual families and let all families tend their own crops. Well, Governor Bradford wrote that everyone worked harder under this plan. In his words, the women now went willingly into ye field and took their little ones with them to set corn, which before would allege weakness and disabilities, whom to have compelled would have been through great tyranny and oppression. Now the settlers, after planting their seeds in that spring of 1623, were deeply concerned as to whether the crops would actually grow. Governor Bradford noted that all the families really meant it when they prayed, Lord, give us this day our daily bread. When the next ship arrived in the summer of 1623, the passengers were shocked and frightened by the look of the starving pilgrims. In autumn of 1623, the harvest of the pilgrims' private gardens was now a great success. In this spirit of deep gratitude to God, Governor Bradford declared a day of thanksgiving. Harvests were plentiful in the years to come, but the pilgrims put 5 kernels of corn by their dinner plates on Thanksgiving to remind them of the great suffering endured by those first settlers. But they never gave up hope of succeeding. So what will we put by our dinner plates this holiday to remind us for what we are thankful? Can we take a step back from everyday activities and compose a list of those areas of our lives in which we feel truly blessed by the divine or fate? Or will we be stuck in the mode of not ever being satisfied with what we have? A middle-aged man who was famous for constant complaining, a nuisance to everyone who knew him, I don't think y'all know anyone like that, inherited a lot of money. After observing that it wasn't as much as he thought it should be, he told his wife, a gentle, sweet-spirited woman, that he thought he would buy some acreage for them to enjoy in their retirement. "What do you think I should name my spread?" he asked. And she replied, "Why don't you call it Belly Acres?" Now, a reading by Richard Kellaway speaks of having hope within ourselves. He says this, "But I found myself drawn into my surroundings. At first, I thought the scene was pretty. Soon I was pulled beyond beauty. The brightness sparkling across the slowly surging water touched and included me. The sunfire heat penetrated with encompassing warmth. The islands floated, boats flowed into elemental forms, and gulls danced serenely before me. And I was dissolved into the elemental stuff of life." Anyone ever had an experience like that? Well, the author describes a trip to the harbor where he became aware of the oneness of the universe. In this experience, he found a hope which provided him with serenity to ride out the troubled waters through which each life must pass. Hope is that feeling that the future will be better and brighter. It is an optimism that more happiness will come into our lives. Without hope, those pilgrims would have given up their quest for that new community in the face of the harsh winters. Now, sometimes our optimism knows no bounds and is unrealistic. An American touring in the Sahara was dressed in a bathing suit. A Bedouin gazed at him in amazement. He said, the tourist said, "I'm going swimming." The Arab said, "But the ocean is 800 miles away." 800 miles away, the American exclaimed with a huge smile, "Boy, what a beach." This person was a bit too confident in their hopes. Now, William Marston was a psychologist, and he asked 3,000 people, "What have you to live for? What have you to live for?" He was shocked to discover that 94% were simply enduring the present while they waited for the future, waited for something to happen, waited for next year, waited for a better time, waited for someone to die, waited for tomorrow, unable to see that all anyone ever has is today. Because yesterday is gone, and tomorrow exists only in hope. We live in the present and need to dwell there in peace. We can appreciate what we have today and be grateful, even as we look for a better future. Now, a sorcerer had fallen out of favor of the court, and the king sentenced him to death. On the day of the planned execution, the sorcerer told the king that if he would allow him to live for 1 year, the king would become famous around the world, because the sorcerer would make the king's horse talk. Now, if the sorcerer failed, the king could kill him, and the sorcerer wouldn't object. Well, the king agreed, and the sorcerer was spared for 1 year and dispatched to a dungeon. Now, a duke who was a friend of the sorcerer sneaked to the dungeon and said, "You are indeed a fool. I know, and you know, that you do not have the power to make animals speak. Now you will surely die." Well, answered the sorcerer, "I have a year. Many things can happen in a year. The king might die. I might die. And who knows? In a year, perhaps the horse might talk." I think that's an optimism ungrounded in reality. So if you were asked this question, what have you to live for? How would you answer? Would you speak about some future goal which you must achieve, or would you tell about the events that are in your life which bring you joy now? Would it be things to amass or people to love? Would it be acquisition of objects, or would it be accessibility to others? The things that bring me hope are the little actions that I and others do to make the world better. The fact that y'all are helping with the shelter for the people who are going to be out in the elements unless they get shelter. That's something that I think is a good thing for us to be doing. When I see an adult spending time with a child, when I see a friend comforting another in pain, when I hear kind words spoken to total strangers, I have more hope that we are learning those ways of peace and harmony with one another. When I observe people making a difference in another's life, I'm warmed with a glow that the world can be made whole. An anonymous reading helps me to know what brings me hope and what brings me gratitude. It is grounded in how we live our lives in relationship with others. Now, you may have heard something similar, but this is what it goes. If I can throw a single ray of light across the darkened pathway of another, if I can aid some soul to clearer sight of life and duty, and thus bless my brother, if I can wipe from any human cheek a tear, I shall not have lived my life in vain while here. If I can guide some erring one to truth, inspire within her heart a sense of duty, if I can plant within my soul of rosy youth a sense of right, a love of truth and beauty, if I can teach one person that God and heaven are near, I shall not then have lived in vain while here. If from my mind I banish doubt and fear and keep my life attuned to love and kindness, if I can scatter light and hope and cheer and help remove the curse of mental blindness, if I can make more joy, more hope, less pain, I shall not have lived and loved in vain. If by life's roadside I can plant a tree, beneath whose shade some wearied head may rest, though I may never share its beauty, I shall be truly blessed. Though no one knows my name, nor drops a flower upon my grave, I shall not have lived in vain while here. So as we approach this holiday where we acknowledge our gratefulness, may we be thankful for those hands that have touched ours, the love that has flowed from one to the other, the opportunities that daily come for us to show kindness to strangers. For when each of these qualities of living are lifted up, we gain a renewed hope that tomorrow will dawn bright and clear. So may your thanksgiving be abundant and your hope overflowing. Amen.